Hello and welcome back to the Skylark song by J.M. Frey. We're on to chapter 6 now. As all good Seelie parents did, Robin's had paid the traditional call to the wise women before her birth. The old woman had smiled into her cup of glass beads and then rolled her eyes heavenward as if to ask, "Goodness, why send me all of these ones today?" "You had better name her after some sort of bird," the woman had said at length, "for she'll spend more time with her head in the clouds than any other girl I've yet had the pleasure of knowing." So, when Robin was 4, and she looked up into the sky and pointed to the sleek silver pleasure zeppelins floating across the dappled blue and said, "Up, up, up, Papa," her parents were only mildly surprised. They shared a look across the top of their daughter's head. "Wasn't at all what I was expecting, but that, I suppose, is a better choice than her wasting her time being a dreamer," Papa had said. "Quite," Robin's mother had agreed, and they'd continued their afternoon walk into the walled Saskwyan city of Pyrrhia. After purchasing the provisions they had come for, things that couldn't be forged in the forest, like flour and bolts of cloth, they carefully counted their remaining coins and bought little Robin a small, sturdy book about zeppelins and airships. It was brightly decorated with primary color-infused cross-section illustrations of how the engines worked, how the balloons were inflated, and the gases inside mixed and heated gently to attain lift, what levers the captains had to haul on and when to make the ornery things go in the proper directions. Robin had spent all evening staring in rapt wonder at the book, seated on her papa's lap in the back garden of the brick house her family had lived in since the great sickness had driven the happily nomadic Seelies from their wagon homes. Back then, their house was on the outskirts of town. Seelies weren't yet allowed inside Pyrrhia's walls overnight. But Robin didn't mind. Their neighborhood was bordered by the forests and roads their people had called home for generations. Then, when Robin turned 7, the Klonn declared war. The trees behind their house were sacrificed to make way for fields of factories, and Robin's neighborhood became part of Pyrrhia itself, the border walls torn down to make smokestacks. Soon after, the Saskwyan king introduced an edict drafting all able-bodied children ages 14 and up, less if certain economic hardships were met, into apprenticeships with one of the nation's vital public services, the armed forces, the factories, or the administrative sector. No one was surprised that Robin chose the air patrol. By 13, she was an engineering private, moved up swiftly to a forge corporal, and by 16, she was a mid-flight sergeant studying aeroship engineering on her days off. By 17, she was one of the few women who remained in service to the air patrol, the others having opted to drop out after the conclusion of their mandatory service, having left to become wives and mothers and raise the next generation of Saskwyan cannon fodder. Now, just 8 months after her 17th birthday, Robin Arianhod had become a pilot. Robin knew how fast gossip carried on the base, and she had no illusions about how quickly it would have traveled off of it. So she wore her uniform home that night in its entirety, and let the few remaining neighbors who had been in the dark stare. Papa wasn't home yet, so Robin stripped off the capelet and goggles and left them hanging on the hall tree before she went to the kitchen to help Mama finish dinner. There wasn't much she could do, though, with her hands the way they were. The bandages were fresh, but only because gunnery training that afternoon had torn up her palms again. Humming, like the soft, welcoming drone of bees, floated from the kitchen as her mother sang in snatches of words and tumble of sighs. "My home is all around me," she sang, the soft lullaby that Robin remembered well from her childhood and loved even better. "And no matter where I roam." Robin threw her arms around Mama's shoulders, buried her nose in her neck, and sang, "As long as I have field and sky and the bees who follow me home." "Ah, it's my daughter, Buzz Buzz," Mama said. "Hello, you." She turned into a hug. Robin set another napkin bundle on the cutting board, this time filled with a small wealth of savory rolls that she'd snatched off the officer's mess buffet after her lunch. She wasn't sure how long she could get away with redistributing food without being reprimanded, but she was willing to do it until that happened. She would just have to remember to bring the cloth napkins back so nobody noticed a dent in the pile. Mama opened the bundle and nodded with appreciation. Then she pushed Robin down into the chair by the hearth and pressed a cup of very thin, very watered wine into her hand. "Your treat for being the Seelie everyone in the neighborhood is proud of." "I don't know," Robin said. She sipped the honey-sweetened liquor. The rest of the bottle sat on the butcher block in the center of the room, and Robin guessed that Mama had traded the whole of the burlap Robin had stolen for her for the bottle. You didn't see the way the other mid-flights looked at me. Did Al look at you that way? Mama asked, brushing her silvering curls off her forehead and turning her attention back to the meager vegetables on the cutting board. No. Then that's all that matters. Mama pressed the knife into the carrots. The rhythmic sound of her chopping was at once soothing and familiar. Robin sank back into the chair and enjoyed the sweetness of the wine, the warmth of the fire, the smell of hard work, and home. For the first time in months, she felt full and satisfied. That Al, Mama said, glancing at Robin.
Give up when you're down. Fly as long as you can. Sing your song in the sky while you're passing by your challenges. I hear a ship. War is raging everywhere, mostly when you're gliding in the air. A silly girl lost in the Klonn land is fleeing the Coyote land. Down behind the lines, wings fighting opposite winds. You struggle with mixed feelings, and you sing the Skylark song. You long for the place you belong, but your heart beats for the unknown. Skylark song, Skylark, thin, bright and strong. Skylark song, winds and steams, mid-flight pilot prey. The winds over today. Winds and steams, mid-flight pilot prey. The winds over today.
I can't say that I'm not scared for you, and I wish that you did not have to fight, but if you must, then I would prefer you do it in the sky, with your head in those clouds you love so much. When Robin reported to the officers' mess for breakfast the next day, little Bill Setty's miserable expression told her she was in for a spot of trouble. "What is it?" she asked as he tugged at the hem of her capelet. He had accosted her as soon as she'd gotten near the long breakfast table. "It's Captain Renge, ma'am," he said, shuffling his feet in a little uncomfortable dance that reminded Robin strongly of a child in need of the water closet. He cut his eyes to the side, and Robin followed his dark gaze. The Bene pilot who'd given her a hard time yesterday was leaning against the mantelpiece, smirking. The tarnished honey pot was upended over the mantel, a golden stream of honey oozing slowly off the edge and down the elaborate scroll work, where it bubbled and pooled at the very edge of the fire in the hearth, mixing with the cinders. "What a clumsy thing that tick boy is," Renge said, her face carefully blank and her tone light. Her hair was pulled back into an impeccable braid, and Robin jammed her hands into her trouser pockets in an effort to dispel the urge to viciously yank the tempting tail. "I weren't neither," Setty whispered, his voice strained. "But she says Sealies do as they're told, ma'am, and I thought, you being a Sealy and all, you'd want the honey, and that means I don't have to listen, 'cause you're a pilot too, but Captain Renge, she says..." He trailed off and looked down at his boots, brown cheeks flushing crimson in shame. Robin resisted the urge to cross the room and pummel Captain Renge. There was already one in this room who'd behaved in a manner unfit for her situation. There didn't need to be two. She wasn't going to give the Bene woman any more ammunition than her religion already afforded. Instead, she crouched and put her hand under the boy's chin, lifting his gaze to meet hers. What did she say, Mr. Seti? Well, that you don't count. That you weren't a real pilot. That you were just a leech like me. Seti winced. She said they promoted you because you and Captain Perwink was... that you were... Thank you. That's good enough. I think I understand, Robin said, teeth clenched. Back to the kitchen with you, Mr. Seti, and bring back another pot of honey. He looked up at her, eyes round. But she'll just make me... and it'll be a waste, and the bees will be so cross. I know, Robin said, and I'm sorry for it, but I need to make a point. I'll just have to hope they forgive me for it. Seti looked unhappy, but went. Robin straightened, and every pair of eyes followed her as she strode across the room. She stopped just out of swinging distance and looked Captain Renge up and down. She said thoughtfully, loud enough for her words to carry into the lounge's corners. You don't look like an idiot. Renge's carefully blank face tightened, but otherwise she made no indication that the insult had hit home. And you don't look like a Bene, she said. She had the gall to reach out and tug Robin's sparrow-brown braid. Insulting. Robin didn't move, didn't wince or pull away like Renge had clearly expected of her. Wow. Hair pulling, Robin said once Renge had let go. That's mature. I could have sworn we were all grown-ups here. And officers. Some of us are officers, Renge said through clenched teeth. And those of you who aren't? Renge grinned, toothy and wolfish, clearly missing the intended insult. Instead, she offered one of her own, lifting both scarred hands and waggling her thumbs meaningfully under Robin's nose. I see, Robin said. She held her arms to the side, spreading the edges of her capelet and making her medal of valor clink. The rest of us are what, then? Not welcome here, Renge hissed. Robin dropped her hands to her sides and made a show of thinking that over. Well, that's funny, Robin said, because I could swear I was welcoming. I mean, I have commissioning papers and everything, and I distinctly recall getting... She looked down and started in mock surprise when she caught sight of her rank pins. Oh, yes, there they are. She pointed a finger at her own throat. Renge took a step forward, getting right in Robin's face. Robin craned her head back as if the extra height Renge brought to bear offered no more concern than finding a housefly on a bread loaf. She smiled placidly. She'd faced down far more frightening foes than Captain Renge, and that was just within the slums of Pyrea. What she faced in the skies above greatly outweighed Renge and her petty insults. We don't want you here, Renge snarled. Several pilots crowed their agreement, fists pumping in the air. A few others disagreed, and suddenly there was a shouting match. Clipped posh Bene accents hurled abuse after abuse at Robin and each other, tossing out the words dirty tick and scrubbed up snob. Renge grinned. Look what you've done, she said. You've turned us against one another. Robin shrugged. You did that yourself. We don't need you. Then why am I standing here in a pilot's uniform? Robin snarled, loud enough to drown out the rest of the arguments. Silence filled the room. Voices cut off mid-shout. Renge's face screwed up as if she just swallowed something sour. You'll never be one of us, parasite. And I thank the gods every day for that, Robin said, raising her palms showily as if in prayer. We have worked hard to be here, all of us, Renge snarled, throwing her own hands wide to indicate the other officers. What have you done to deserve what you have? How have you suffered? Suffering? Robin scoffed. You call being a pilot in the air patrol suffering? Your wage is twice what my father makes in a year. You get a hot breakfast every day. You have never had to steal to make sure you can do your job. You have everything, and we have to scrounge. You sit here and play your silly war games, and it's the Sealies who have to pay for it. The Sealies who suffer for it. The Sealies on whose back you ride! Renge swung her fist at Robin's face, her lightning-quick pilot's reflexes too fast for Robin. Unlike the brat from the canteen, the notion that Renge would try to punch her was so absurd that Robin hadn't even expected Renge to contemplate a physical attack. Renge caught her square in the jaw, though, and Robin reeled backwards, fetching up hard against one of the tall breakfast tables. 2 other pilots jumped forward to put themselves between Renge and Robin. They didn't restrain Renge or try to drag her off, but they made sure to block her way. Robin put out a hand to steady herself. Nobody stepped forward to help. With her other hand, Robin touched the bandages on the back of her hand to the side of her lip. It felt swollen and hot, but it came away clean. "You're a child," Robin said quietly, straightening. "You can't stand to have me in your sandbox. Well, guess what? I have every right to be here. More than a right, I think. Unlike the rest of your colleagues, I didn't get my ass shot up by the Coyote. And doesn't that just twist you up inside? First pilot to survive a dance with the Coyote, and it's a dirty little Sealy." "It should have been you!" Renge screamed, fists balled at her sides in impotent rage. "It should have been you instead of Wade. He was a good pilot!" "That he was," Robin spat, and even to her own ears, her voice sounded low and dangerous. "At least one of us is honoring what he's sacrificed." She took a deliberate step past the pilots who blocked her way. Neither moved to stop her. Robin walked to the hearth and righted the overturned honey pot. "I hope that, in the future, you'll be a little more conscientious, Captain Renge," she stage whispered. "In case you haven't noticed, there's a war on. It's a shame to waste anything so callously." "It's only honey," Renge said. "Nobody but a Sealy would care." A small cough interrupted the furious silence, and Robin looked up to see the same lieutenant colonel from yesterday standing in the threshold, face furious as a thunderclap and mustache quivering. Robin's insides quivered as well, and she bit her cheeks to keep her expression steady. Oh, gods, this was it. They were going to reprimand her for behavior unbecoming an officer. They were going to demote her. They were going to ask for the bonus pay packet back. The lieutenant colonel crooked a finger. Renge's face glowed with triumph. "Captain Renge," the lieutenant colonel said in a deceptively sing-song voice, "my office now." Robin bit harder on the inside of her cheek to keep from grinning smugly. Renge shuffled around her supporters and, eyes downcast, followed the lieutenant colonel out of the lounge, docile as the cow she resembled. Her milky fair complexion burned, and the glare she threw back over her shoulder promised many more confrontations in mornings to come. But Robin didn't care. Let the scrubbed-up cow work herself into a lather. The only enemy Robin wanted to give her attention to were the Klonn. Robin stared around the room, daring anyone else to challenge her right there. The rest of the pilots took the hint and went back to their breakfasts. A small tug on her capelet brought her attention down to the returned Bill Seti, an unopened pot of honey clutched in his hands, and a look of adoration painted on his face. Robin crouched down and met his wide-eyed gaze. "Ma'am," he whispered, "that was rutting fantastic! I've never seen a Sealy stand up to a Bene like that before." Robin reached out and ruffled his black hair. "Who taught you that word?" "I hear it in the canteen all the time," Seti said, childishly defensive. "If the mid-flights can use it, why can't I?" Robin smiled. "Fair enough, just don't let your mother hear you say it." Seti's face fell. She understood in an instant. "I'm sorry." "It's okay," Seti lied. "It was years and years ago." "I'm still sorry." Seti looked away, tiny jaw clenched. "It's not fair, but it's the fate of the gods chose for her. She's been reborn, I bet. She's probably got a big house and a nice family and lots of money." "It's still not fair, though." Robin sighed and scrubbed at the spot between her eyes, where a headache had begun to gather. It's the poor who pay when the nobility play at war. What's that mean? Seti asked, blinking swiftly. Robin ignored the way his lashes clumped together with moisture. If I have any say in the matter, nothing you'll have to worry about when you grow up, Robin said and ruffled his hair again. He held out the honey pot and she took it, placing it deliberately on the table beside the sugar bowl. Then she went about assembling a breakfast filled with the delicious things she could smuggle out for Al. Little Bill Seti scampered to his side of the table and beamed at her when she dolloped a spoonful of honey into each of the prim little teacups. Was it petty? Sure. Did it make her feel better? Oh, hells yes. Robin was formally given Wade's glider, the sweet crotchety old thing. Robin was glad she got to keep flying in it, and asked to pick her mid-flight 3 days later. She had passed the flight training with little concern and, her instructor said, about a week faster than most newly commissioned pilots. Robin claimed it was because she'd already spent so much time in the air as a mid-flight herself, but she knew that command still suspected Wade had been actively teaching her. Well, let them think that, she decided. Maybe they'll get it into their heads to train up and promote more of us. She threw herself into her lessons as she threw her body weight to the side to help the glider bank more steeply. That is, completely, and with as much force as she could muster. Mama was right. Clearly the gods knew what they were doing. Sweaty and grimy from her morning exertions, Robin scanned the canteen for the particular forged drone she'd had her eye on, scouting through the crowd of mid-flights and apprentices hurrying in from their forges and repair hangars and gliders. They were flushed with the thrill of camaraderie and honest work, painted in grease and oil and happiness. Catching sight of her target, Robin clutched the orders she'd been asked to deliver and strode across the room to where Al was seated with Frey. This time, when she sat, the snotty blonde kid didn't get up and leave. Instead, he stared into her face, blushing and obvious. He could stare openly now that she was more than just a lowly Seelie. Prig. Although it was the papers in her hands that caught his hungry gaze this time, and not her previously admired rear end. Robin wasn't in the mood to make ridiculous small talk. She had no patience for the people who had, in the past week, suddenly stopped ignoring her and tried to cozy up. Most of the other captains were doing it because she was proving to be some kind of wonder kid, and base myth-making already had her chasing the Coyote across all points of the compass, instead of just over one forest. Some stories even had claimed that she'd shot him down, though those ones had been disproved when the Coyote had appeared above the forest outside of Lylon yesterday morning, circling intently over the place where Robin had kicked his aeroship. It felt strangely like he was calling her out, daring her to come kick it again, and she didn't like the shiver it sent zipping up her spine. Only Al, Officer Vendor, and the generals who'd read her report knew what they thought was the truth, and Robin hadn't even told them everything. So what if the rumor mill was pumping out wildly outrageous claims about her abilities and disgustingly intimate lies about how, exactly, she'd earned her commission? She knew as well as any other captain that your reputation on the ground often found its way to the enemy's ears, and that such reputations only served to help dishearten them in the sky. So the whole world wanted to think that Robin Arianhod had single-handedly taken on the Coyote and sent him back to Klonn with his tail between his legs? Fantastic. It would only make other Klonn pilots reluctant to engage her. Frey cleared his throat, and Robin forestalled him by slapping her envelope on the table. The outside had the seal of the king emblazoned in one corner, and the words, Letter of Promotion, Sergeant, Mid-Flight, clearly inked out in the other. Frey set aside his lunch and stared hard at the envelope. So did Al. The color drained from Al's face and his eyes sparked with jealousy. Before he could say anything, Robin flipped the envelope over and into Al's lap. It took Frey a second to register what had happened, and then he was gone, shoving away from the table and stomping out of the room. Scrubbed up prig, Robin thought, as if I was ever going to hand it to him without him ever earning it. Robin? Al asked, voice wavering, dark eyes wide and brick wall face slack with shock. I know you want to be a mid-flight, Robin said. The tables around them had sunk into complete silence, every nearby ear straining to hear what she said. Robin ignored them. I know you want to get away from the forges and into the air, and I know that none of the pilots would pick you because you're too much weight. Hey, Al protested weakly, but he was still staring at the envelope sitting face down in his lap, dark eyes wide and lips trembling. His fingers twitched, but his hands remained steadfastly in the air, away from the envelope as if he was scared it would burn him. I'm small, Robin said. I need counterbalance. I need someone who can put their shoulders into the turns. I need someone to move the glider like I can't. But most of all, Al, she said, reaching out to take one blackened hand in her blood-spotted one. I need someone at my back that I can trust. She looked pointedly at the gossips around her. Al met her eyes and smiled, turning his hand over to twine his thick fingers with hers. Then he grabbed the commission packet and stuffed it into a pocket, jamming it carelessly into a ball. Okay, Al agreed. If this is the only way you'll let me be... He trailed off, the tips of his ears going pinkish. Let you what? Robin asked. Work with me? Yeah, sure, work with you. He patted his pocket. Just... I have one condition. What? Robin asked. I want to paint a robin on the nose of the glider. What? Robin asked again, though this time the tone clearly implied that Al had sweated away most of his brain at the forge. Everyone runs from the Coyote when they spot him, yeah? He asked, excitement firing in his eyes. Well, we're gonna make those Klonn bastards start running from us. See you in Chapter 7.
Give up when you're down. Fly as long as you can.